L'Shana Tova, my friends, my community. No. Let me try that again. Not my friends and my community part. That was perfect. But let me try this part again. L'Shana Yoter Tova. May it be a better year in 5781. Can you hear that sound? 5780 and 2020 has been a year of exceptional crises caused by natural factors such as gigantic wildfires in Australia, California, Oregon, and Washington, and by the mutation, or is it evolution, of the novel coronavirus, resulting in the COVID-19 pandemic that has changed our way of life, at least for now. 2020 has also been a year of exceptional crisis caused by human factors, structural racism, deadly violence against Black Americans, opportunistic extremist violence that has marred peaceful and sacred protests, and the cesspool of toxic rhetoric that dominates our nation's political discourse, quite possibly placing our democracy on the precipice of a constitutional crisis. In 2020 and in 5780, our collective focus as individuals, communities, and a nation has been on enduring. As we enter this new year, I've been asking myself, and now I will ask you, how will we continue to endure? How will we adapt? Is there any reason for a sane and rational person to have hope? These are seemingly simple questions, but as we have all experienced, there is nothing simple about the world we inhabited in 5780 and the world that we must navigate in 5781. Today, I would like to present two ideas that have helped me navigate the terrain of endurance, adaptation, and hope. The first idea was suggested to me by someone dear to our community. I was working in my office one afternoon when the phone rang, and I was delighted to hear the voice of our beloved emeritus, Rabbi Richard Safran, on the other end of the line. He called to welcome me to Fort Wayne and to Achdut V'Shalom, and we had a lovely and wide-ranging conversation about this community as well as what he had on his mind. It turns out that he had just read something that he wanted to tell me about. And when I told him what I was working through in terms of the questions of endurance, adaptability, and hope for our world, he graciously gave me permission to share this with you. Here it is. The world's greatest resource is unnatural, and our future will rest primarily on this unnatural resource. This is the core idea of a recent editorial by Mark Sappenfield in the Christian Science Monitor Weekly, in an issue with a cover story titled "The Big Energy Pivot." It reports on the transition of American energy production from coal to renewable energy sources. While it appears that the momentum of wind and solar power have surpassed coal, which is a win for the environment and for any hope we have of mitigating climate change. Even though those things are true, that is not what Sappenfield meant when he was talking about the resources that would carry us all into the future. He writes, "The world's wealth is looking increasingly unnatural. As wealth is used up, economies will rely more on human capital. Natural resources are valuable only as long as they exist or are deemed necessary. Whale blubber was once vitally important to the functioning of world societies. Not so much anymore. Humans found a better answer." Sappenfield acknowledges that these changes are massively disruptive, upsetting communities and economies, and he identifies the solution for navigating this disruption and the changes that it wreaks. Again, It is human capital. He continues, investing in education, opportunity, and interconnection is an economic engine that never risks running out of fuel. In the future, the most valuable commodity we can mine will be the innate potential of our fellow human beings. Human capital tends to accumulate. Natural capital seems destined to do the opposite. In the past, America has pinned its hopes for progress on land, on harnessing the power of steam, electricity, or the atom, or on industrialization. In my lifetime, technology based on the capacity of tiny silicon chips to run massive and later tiny, I'm wearing one, tiny computers, and the ability to network these computers together revolutionized almost everything, and even gave us the option to be together today for this streaming service. For generations, the paradigm of progress has been used by our society's ability to identify natural resources and to use them to propel us forward. Now, that time is past, and instead, according to Mark Sappenfield and other economic and social observers, our progress will now come from the ability of human beings with our innate potential to connect to each other and to solve problems and to create opportunity with new ideas. I like this idea of Mark Sappenfield's. I really do. It excites me and it inspires me. But let's be real for a moment. Given what we have witnessed just in the past year, how confident do you feel in human beings right now? I could describe many instances of antisocial or simply unintelligent and uninspiring behavior that have overflowed from media, locally, nationally, and globally. But I won't, because I'm pretty confident that you can easily imagine that for yourselves. Human beings have not always been at their best when we experience the worst. So what exactly is this human capital that will accumulate? What is it going to do for us? How can it help us to endure, to adapt, and to hope? That brings me to the second idea that I wanted to share with you today. Earlier this year, I read a book by the Dutch historian and journalist Rutger Bregman with a title that really caught my attention. Here it is: Humankind, a Hopeful History. Bregman is 32 years old and has been called one of the most prominent young thinkers today. In Humankind, his thesis is, he says, a simple but quite radical idea. What if most people deep down are pretty decent? It's fair to argue that in this moment, that might be a challenging idea to swallow, at least on a bad day. But in Humankind, Bregman shares a series of historical vignettes that challenge various philosophical ideas or historical conclusions that human beings are challenged by goodness. Bregman begins Humankind by telling the story of the London Blitz, when German bombs rained down over the city of London from September 1940 to May 1941. Bregman writes, "On the eve of the Second World War, the British Army Command found itself facing an existential threat. London was in grave danger. The city, according to a certain Winston Churchill, formed the greatest target in the world, a kind of tremendous fat cow, a valuable fat cow tied up to attract the beasts of prey." The beast of prey was, of course, Adolf Hitler and his war machine. If the British population broke under the terror of his bombers, it would spell the end of the nation. Traffic will cease. The homeless will shriek for help. The city will be in pandemonium, feared one British general. Millions of civilians would succumb to the strain, and the army wouldn't even get around to fighting because it would have its hands full with the hysterical masses. Churchill predicted that at least 3 to 4 million Londoners would flee the city. Bregman continues, anyone wanting to read up on the evils to be unleashed needed to read only one book, Psychologie des Foules, The Psychology of the Masses, by one of the most influential scholars of his day, the Frenchman Gustave Le Bon. Hitler read the book cover to cover. So did Mussolini, Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt. Le Bon's book gives us a play-by-play of how people respond to crisis. Almost instantaneously, he wrote, man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. I'm sure he meant humankind. Panic and violence erupt, and we humans reveal our true nature. As the British military and Churchill's government prepared for the onslaught, they were planning for the complete decompensation of the social order in response to the terror and chaos of massive, sustained bombing in London. Finally, the anticipated attack began. Over the following 9 months, more than 80,000 bombs were dropped on London, damaging or destroying thousands of buildings and wiping out neighborhoods. More than 40,000 people lost their lives. So what happened among the populace? A Canadian psychiatrist recorded an account of his visit to London. It goes like this. In October 1940, Dr. John McCurdy drove through southeast London to visit a poor neighborhood that had been particularly hard hit. All that remained was a patchwork of craters and crumbled buildings. He saw that small boys continued to play all over the pavements. Shoppers went on haggling. A policeman directed traffic in majestic boredom, and the bicyclists defied death and the traffic laws. No one, as far as he could see, even looked into the sky. In fact, if there's one thing that all accounts of the Blitz have in common, it is their description of a strange serenity that settled over London in those months. An American journalist interviewing a British couple in their kitchen noted how they sipped tea even as the windows rattled in their frame. Weren't they afraid? The journalist asked. Oh no, was the answer. If we were, what good would it do us? In the wake of the London Blitz, there was no uptick in mental illness. Certainly, there was sadness and trauma, and there was grief. But the stiff upper lip, the resilient nature of the British people led to a high degree of social cohesion. When put to the test, the theories set forth by the celebrated crowd psychologist Gustave Le Bon could hardly have been further off the mark. Crisis brought out not the worst, but the best in people. Rutger Bregman's theory of human nature, that people deep down are pretty decent, that in the midst of difficulty we do the right thing, offers an elegant and radical way of viewing the present moment. And it echoes what we know from our own Jewish tradition. First, as creations made B'Tselem Elohim in the image of God, we are imbued with God's inherent goodness. Second, our covenant with God calls us to be holiness in the world. It is not enough to simply be inherently good. We must make that goodness manifest in the world through acts of holiness. Finally, we have a responsibility to others that is twofold. We have a responsibility to Kol Yoshvei Tevel, to everyone who inhabits the earth. We are to be a light unto the nations, and we have a responsibility to each other. As the rabbis teach, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh, all Jews are responsible to each other. This system of qualities and responsibilities cannot work if we cannot also rely on basic human goodness. Please allow me to address one issue directly. Actually, two issues directly. The first, I described the story of the London Blitz and of Germany's endless, it seemed to them, attack on the British people. But we know the Nazis more than attacked our people. And those accounts weren't in Bregman's work. But I think we all know the stories we have heard, the telling that have been passed down through the generations now, of the moments of exquisite humanity that were given between people who were imprisoned in the concentration camps. People being able to carry on with dignity in the face of immense horror and daily fear for their lives. That inherent goodness, that ability to stay whole, was demonstrated widely among our people in the Holocaust. So Bregman didn't mention that, so I will. The second issue that I want to confront directly, related to the first, what about evil? How do we account for people who are not inherently decent, but rather who cause pain, suffering, and death in the world? Rutger Bregman himself admits that his view of human nature does not discount evil, but he has an explanation. By itself, evil is more powerful than good, but there's much, much more good in this world than evil. So good doesn't beat evil by being more powerful, it beats evil by sheer force of numbers. So let's back up to where I started. We are living through an uncommonly difficult period. Most of us alternately experience fear, anxiety, boredom, fatigue, and worry. The way we have all gotten this far is through a combination of endurance, of adaptation, and hope. But these require energy for us to be able to continue to move forward. In my journey to Rosh Hashanah, I have encountered two ideas. First, that human capital is ascendant, and that the path to solving our collective challenges is going to be people-powered. Second, we can have confidence that people power will indeed take us to where we need to go because of the inherent goodness with which humans have been created. That will lead us to do more good than bad. We can choose to rely on one another. We can choose to do this, to support one another as we do the hard work of enduring and adapting to our chaotic and our broken world. At the beginning of this new year, may it be God's will that we cultivate hope, that we support one another, and that we bring the best of each other to get closer to the day when we can stand near one another, look deeply into each other's uncovered faces, and embrace. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may this be God's will speedily and in our day. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova, Yasher Koach.